it's that time of the year to do a beach check, because I wanted to see if it's going to do what it did last year and wreck everything on the irrigation side of life.
Have you ever watched someone on YouTube and thought you knew exactly who they were, only to realize there might be a whole different story hiding beneath the surface? Because when it comes to Larson Farms, millions of viewers recognize the tractors, the harvest chaos, and the larger-than-life personalities. But there's one figure who seems to stand right at the center of it all: Dougo Larson. To many, he's the stubborn, quick-witted farm veteran who somehow ends up in the most unbelievable situations. The guy who makes stressful moments look almost funny. The one fans quote in the comments like he's part legend, part family. But what if the version everyone sees on camera is only half the story? Behind the laughs, the close calls, and the viral farm moments is a man carrying the weight of something much bigger than internet fame. We're talking about a multi-generational operation, decades of expectations, and the kind of responsibility that doesn't pause just because a camera is rolling. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Doug Larson isn't just a personality on a farming channel. He represents tradition colliding with a rapidly changing world. So how did an everyday farmer become one of the most talked about faces in modern agriculture? And what has it truly cost him? Most people think Dougo Larson is playing a character. The stubborn farm guy, the one-liner machine, the man who somehow ends up at the center of every chaotic moment. But here's the truth that longtime viewers start to realize: Dougo isn't acting. What you see is exactly who he is, and that authenticity is a big reason people can't stop watching. On camera, Doug comes across as unfiltered and steady, the kind of person who doesn't panic when things go sideways. Equipment breaks, weather shifts, plans fall apart, and somehow he keeps moving like it's just another Tuesday. That calm presence didn't come from YouTube. It came from decades of farm life, where stress isn't an occasional visitor. It's part of the job description. But the internet has a funny way of simplifying people. Viewers often see the humor first, the stubborn decisions, the muttered reactions, the moments that make you laugh because you know they probably shouldn't be funny. Over time, those clips build a persona, and before you know it, Dougo starts to feel larger than life. Yet what many don't consider is what happens after the camera stops rolling. Because on a working farm, mistakes don't just disappear in the next upload. A delayed harvest can cost serious money. A mechanical failure can throw off an entire season. Even a small miscalculation can create a ripple effect that follows a farmer for months. The pressure is constant, and unlike most jobs, there's no real off-season for responsibility. That's what makes Doug so interesting. Beneath the humor is someone carrying the expectations of a family operation that has been built over generations. Farms like this aren't just businesses, they're legacies. And when you're one of the people steering that legacy forward, every decision matters more than outsiders realize. Still, Doug rarely shows that weight outright. Instead, it surfaces in subtle ways. The serious tone during tight timelines, the laser focus when conditions turn unpredictable, the refusal to quit even when a day clearly isn't going his way. And just when you start to understand the man behind the nickname, you begin to wonder where that relentless drive came from, because it wasn't created overnight, and the story behind it reveals far more than anyone expected. Long before Larson Farms ever showed up on screens, before the comments and the millions of views, this was simply a piece of land with a future riding on it. The farm traces its roots back over a century, built generation by people who understood one brutal truth. Farming isn't something you clock out of. It becomes your identity. Imagine growing up surrounded by that kind of history. Every field has a story. Every building stands because someone before you refused to quit during a tough year. On legacy farms, you don't just inherit opportunity, you inherit expectation. And whether anyone says it out loud or not, there is always an invisible question hanging in the air. Will you be the generation that keeps it alive? For Doug, this wasn't a role he stepped into later in life. It was always there, shaping how he thought, how he worked, and how he handled pressure. Because when your family name is tied directly to the land, failure feels personal. A bad season isn't just disappointing. It can feel like letting down decades of sacrifice. What most viewers don't see is how heavy that responsibility can get. Farming has never been predictable, but in recent years, the stakes have only climbed higher. Equipment costs have exploded. Margins can get razor thin. One difficult harvest or unexpected shift can undo months of effort almost overnight. While audiences might see scenic sunsets and massive machines, the reality often involves long nights filled with calculations, contingency plans, and quiet stress. And here's where the pressure becomes different from other family businesses. You can't simply pivot when things go wrong. Farmers battle forces completely outside their control. Weather doesn't negotiate. Markets don't care how hard you worked. Timing can make or break an entire year. This is the environment that forged Doug's steady, no-nonsense attitude. That calm people notice on camera, it's not personality alone. It's survival. When panic helps no one, you learn to stay level-headed no matter what hits. But just as Doug mastered the weight of tradition, something unexpected began creeping toward farms like his. Something that would transform not only the business, but his entire public identity. Because the next challenge wasn't in the soil, it was on the internet. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where Doug woke up and decided he was about to become an internet personality. It started the way most things do on farms: simple, practical, almost accidental. A camera set up to document daily work, a way to show what modern agriculture really looks like. No script, no media training, just real life. And that's exactly what made it explode. Viewers weren't drawn in by polished editing or dramatic music. They were hooked by the honesty. The early videos didn't try to turn farming into something glamorous. They showed breakdowns, tight timelines, unpredictable weather, and the kind of problem solving that happens when there's no backup plan. Doug wasn't performing for clicks. He was doing what he'd always done, working through whatever the day threw at him. But the internet has a way of amplifying personalities. The calm reactions, the dry humor, the stubborn determination when something clearly isn't going smoothly. Audiences started gravitating toward those moments. Comments multiplied, inside jokes formed, and before long, Dougo wasn't just a nickname. It was a brand viewers felt connected to. That's when things subtly changed, because once thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands, of people are watching, the stakes feel different. Every decision, every mistake, every tense exchange becomes permanent. A tough day in the field doesn't fade into memory anymore. It gets replayed, clipped, discussed. Some fans celebrate the authenticity, others critique it, and suddenly, farm life isn't just private responsibility, it's public conversation. For Doug, that meant balancing two realities at once. The real farm still needed attention. Crops didn't care about view counts. Equipment didn't wait for a better filming angle. At the same time, the audience expected consistency, transparency, and that same unfiltered personality they had grown, attached to. And that balancing act, it created a new kind of pressure. One that previous generations never had to face. Because now, it wasn't just about protecting the land, it was about protecting the reputation attached to it. Here's the part most viewers don't fully grasp. The moments that look entertaining on screen are often the exact moments farmers hope never happen. When a massive machine refuses to start, when a critical part snaps at the worst possible time, or when weather suddenly shifts during a narrow harvest window, that isn't content. That's potential damage control. And Doug has found himself in those situations more times than he'd probably prefer. What makes him stand out isn't that things go wrong, because on a farm, something always does. It's how he responds when they do. There's a steadiness to him. No dramatic outbursts, no panic. Just a laser focus on solving the problem before it snowballs into something bigger. Viewers often laugh at the tension-breaking comments or that classic Dougo stubbornness, but underneath it is a mindset built from years of experience. Keep moving forward, no matter what. Still, experience doesn't make the consequences disappear. Modern farming operates on razor-thin timing. If planting gets delayed, yields can drop. If harvest runs late, quality can suffer. When equipment goes down, the clock doesn't pause, and neither do the bills. Repairs alone can climb into numbers most people would find shocking. Add fuel, labor, and seasonal uncertainty, and suddenly a single rough stretch can carry weight long after the cameras stop rolling. That's why some of Doug's most talked about moments carry an edge that attentive viewers can feel. You might see determination on the surface, but behind it is rapid calculation. How much time is being lost? Is there a backup plan? Can the season still be salvaged? It reveals something important about him. The humor isn't denial, it's composure. Because when you're responsible for an operation that others depend on, frustration doesn't fix anything. Leadership means absorbing the pressure so the work keeps moving. But while mechanical problems test patience, they're predictable compared to the next challenge Doug would face. One that had nothing to do with engines, fields, or forecasts. The real complexity was about to come from much closer to home. If you want to understand the real intensity behind a multi-generational farm, don't look at the machinery. Look at the relationships. Because long before any official handoff happens, there's always a quiet shift taking place. New ideas start entering the conversation. Different risk tolerances emerge. And suddenly, experience meets ambition at the same decision table. For someone like Doug, that transition isn't just business. It's deeply personal. Imagine dedicating most of your life to building something stable, learning lessons the hard way, surviving tough cycles, and developing instincts that only decades can teach. Then, one day, the next generation steps in with fresh strategies, modern tools, and a hunger to push things forward. It's not conflict by default, but it can create friction, even in the strongest families. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to talk about. Letting go is one of the hardest jobs a leader will ever face. Dougie has long represented the steady backbone of the operation, the voice shaped by years of trial, error, and persistence. Meanwhile, younger energy naturally leans toward efficiency, growth, and sometimes taking calculated risks. Neither side is wrong. In fact, farms that survive tend to find a balance between the two. But balance doesn't happen overnight. There are moments when decisions likely take longer than expected, times when tradition quietly squares off with innovation. And even when those conversations are respectful, they carry emotional weight, because this isn't just about strategy, it's about legacy. Viewers occasionally sense this dynamic, even if it's never spelled out. A brief pause before agreeing, a stronger tone during a high-pressure day, a subtle shift in who takes the lead during critical moments. These aren't signs of dysfunction, they're signs of evolution. What makes Doug fascinating in this phase is that he doesn't appear to be someone chasing control. If anything, he comes across like a man determined to see the farm continue thriving long after his heaviest days are behind him. And that mindset requires something many people underestimate: trust. Trust that the values hold. Trust that the next generation is ready. Trust that the decades of work will remain protected. But just as the internal dynamics of the farm continue to evolve, another force has been growing outside the fields. One Doug never signed up for, yet can't completely avoid: public attention. And with attention comes speculation. The moment a real family lets the world peek into their daily life, something strange begins to happen. Viewers stop feeling like spectators and start feeling like insiders. At first, it's harmless. People recognize faces, learn personalities, and grow attached to the rhythm of the operation. But over time, curiosity naturally drifts into something more powerful: speculation. All it takes is one familiar person appearing less often, one routine changing, one unexplained absence. Suddenly, comment sections start filling with questions. Did something happen? Are they still around? Why does this feel different? And just like that, ordinary life events can turn into full-blown internet theories. Doug has never come across as someone chasing drama. If anything, he seems wired for the opposite. Handle the work, keep things moving, don't make noise unless it matters. But the reality of being part of a widely watched farm is that silence doesn't stop narratives from forming. Sometimes it fuels them. One of the biggest triggers for online chatter is change. People grow comfortable with consistency, so when the lineup shifts, whether it's a helper, a recurring personality, or someone fans enjoyed seeing, the audience notices immediately. Most of the time, the explanation is simple. Farming is seasonal. Roles evolve. Life pulls people in different directions. But the internet rarely settles for simple. Instead, small gaps get filled with assumptions. Stories stretch. Guesses start sounding like facts. and before anyone involved has said a word, a version of events is already circulating. It's the hidden cost of authenticity. When you show enough of your life to build trust, people feel entitled to the parts you keep private too. For someone like Doug, that creates a delicate balancing act. Be open enough to stay genuine, yet guarded enough to protect the people and relationships that matter most. Because not every decision belongs in public, and not every chapter needs explaining. Still, this constant spotlight reveals something telling about Doug's character. He doesn't appear reactive. He doesn't rush to correct every rumor or chase every narrative. That kind of restraint usually comes from confidence and from knowing exactly who you are, regardless of what's being said. Yet beyond the noise, beyond the guesses, and beyond the watchful audience, there's a deeper layer to Doug's story that rarely gets discussed, and it might be the most revealing part of all. Strip away the machinery, the deadlines, the online attention, and the constant pressure, and you start to see a quieter force shaping Doug's life. Purpose. Because people don't endure decades in agriculture, ride out uncertain seasons, and carry the weight of a family operation unless something deeper is anchoring them. For Doug, that anchor appears to be rooted in values that don't fluctuate with markets or weather. There's a steadiness about him that suggests this was never just about growing crops or expanding an operation. It was about building something meaningful, something that could outlast him. When you look closely, a pattern starts to emerge: the resilience, the patience during setbacks, the refusal to fold when a day clearly isn't going his way. Those traits usually come from a lifetime of perspective, not personality alone, because farming has a way of humbling even the toughest people. You learn quickly that control is often an illusion, and the only real choice is whether you show up again tomorrow ready to fight for another season. And Doug keeps showing up. What's especially telling is that he doesn't carry himself like someone searching for recognition. The camera may have amplified his presence, but it doesn't seem to define him. If anything, he comes across like a man who would be doing the exact same work, with the same intensity, whether anyone was watching or not. That mindset hints at a powerful why. Not fame, not applause, but responsibility, family, continuity. Because at the heart of nearly every long-standing farm is a quiet mission. Leave it better than you found it. Protect the opportunity so the next generation has a foundation instead of a burden. That kind of thinking requires long visions, the ability to care about outcomes you may never personally benefit from. It also requires sacrifice, though that's the part few people ever talk about. Early mornings that blur into long nights. Stress that follows you home. Decisions that sit heavy long after they're made. Yet Doug rarely broadcasts that side of the journey. Instead, it shows up in his consistency, the ultimate signal of commitment. And once you recognize that deeper drive, the entire story starts to look different. Because the laughs, the stubborn moments, even the tension, they're not the headline. They're just the surface of a life built on something far more enduring. Which raises one final question. When someone spends a lifetime carrying the torch, what happens when it's finally time to pass it on? So what is the untold story of Doug Dougo Larson? Surprisingly, it isn't built around scandal, explosive drama, or some hidden double life. The real story is far quieter, and far more powerful than most people expect. It's the story of a man standing at the intersection of tradition and change. Someone shaped by decades of early mornings, uncertain seasons, and the kind of responsibility that never fully switches off. While the internet may see the humor, the stubborn streak, and the unforgettable one-liners, those moments only scratch the surface. Beneath them is a person who understands that farming isn't just a career. It's a commitment to something bigger than yourself. Doug represents a generation that didn't chase attention, but learned how to live with it. A generation now facing the delicate challenge of guiding the future while slowly stepping aside. And that might be the most overlooked part of his journey, knowing that true success isn't holding on forever, but preparing others to carry things forward. Maybe that's why his presence resonates with so many people.